Shalom, this is Rabbi Klein from the Greater Miami Jewish Federation. I'd like to share a story. This week I spoke with an individual in another state, and she was experiencing some extreme complicated grief. And she was watching the TV day in and day out, watching the different news networks, seeing what was happening in Surfside. And these events only re-traumatized her, reinforced the grief. Although she had no actual personal connection to any of the individuals or the events here. And she said to me something that I was shocked by. She said that she wished she could change place with any number of the people that are missing right now. There are times in our lives when things seem so dark and people feel such despair that they can undermine our very foundation, the reasons for which we wake up every morning. And I think for so many in Miami and around the world, this week's events feel like that kind of event. But even if we don't feel that kind of despair, we definitely feel dis-ease. What are we supposed to do with all of this dis-ease, this fear, this doubt, this anxiety that we may be experiencing? We walk through the world most days and we think that we understand where we are, and suddenly the floor falls out. Reality begins to crumble underneath our feet. What are we supposed to do with these feelings of uncertainty? Indeed, we want to live through this world with faith, but living with faith on certain days can be so difficult. In essence, major crises like the one that we are dealing with threaten to unravel the very values which define our lives. It's dangerous, actually, to go down that rabbit hole, because who knows if we're going to come out. Now, this week's Parsha presents not a theological crisis, but a religious and moral crisis. And I want to focus on one person, Pinchas, and how his response to a totally different crisis might inform us in the situation in which we find ourselves. This week's Parsha opens with the aftermath of the story of Baal Peor, and it deserves a little bit of review. So last week we remember the Moabite prophet Bilam, and he tries to curse the Jewish people. He tries various strategies by bribing God, bringing altars to God, bringing sacrifices in different places. And the assumption is if I bribe God enough, maybe God will curse the Jewish people and not continually bless the Jewish people. But in the end, Bilam admits to himself, this people is indeed blessed by God, and I cannot bribe God. But Bilam persists. He does not give up. He has a new strategy. What would it look like, Bilam says to himself, if we were to simply undermine the character of the Jewish people themselves? Would God still love the Jewish people if they weren't a faithful people, but a faithless people? If they were undeserving? And so he thinks about this strategy, and he goes and gives advice to the Midianites and the Moabites. And he gives them this strategy, which they do follow. He says, the Jewish people are in the desert, and they're looking for fine clothing. They need clothing. You should open up stalls and tents, and put in those tents clothing for sale, but behind it, put also harlots. And what you should do is when the Jewish people go to buy their goods in these tents, you should give them some wine, you should wine and dine them, and then bring out the harlots. And, of course, being drunk, their defenses will be down, their Yetzer Hara will grow, their evil inclination will grow, and they'll engage with these harlots in licentious behavior. And before you know it, they'll be worshiping other idols. And that's actually what happens in essence. It's almost like the golden calf, where the Jewish people regress to having incorrect sexual behavior, drunkenness, revelry. That's what it sounds like in this story of Baal Peor. A plague ensues among the camp. And at the height of the crisis, Zimri, who is the prince of the tribe of Shimon, so one of the heads of the Jewish people, gets up and in front of everybody and Moses has carnal relations with a Midianite woman. This is a clear challenge to God, a clear challenge to Moses, and is meant to disgrace Moses. At this very point, nobody is doing anything. Everyone is sitting around saying, what should we do? Pinchas, who's the grandson of Aaron, one of the priests, gets up with a spear and kills both of them at the same time in the middle of the act, and the plague ends. At the beginning of this week's Parashat, the word kana, to be jealous or to be zealous, occurs a few times in connection with the action of Pinchas. And Pinchas seems to be blessed for his act of passion, his act of zealousness, zealotry, his his commitment. Now, this text has all sorts of ethical and philosophical questions, including the question, how can Pinchas act this way towards another person without due process? Can vigilante justice be a model for the Jewish people? And why does God even agree to all of this? The rabbis in the Talmud and other places discuss all of these ethical issues. And yet, the literal meaning of this text is God blesses him for this. So in fact, there is a place for zealousness, or you might call extremism in Jewish life. The middle of the camp cannot survive as long as there is idolatry and licentious and terrible values in the middle of the camp. Pinchas is a Cohen. His raison d'etre, his main reason for being, is to bring people close to God. Pinchas cannot see what's going on in the middle of the camp, this desecration of God, this desecration of Moses, and just sit there and watch. Pinchas, in his zealotry, decides to act if no one else is going to act. You know, today, zealotry is considered a dirty word, associated with extremism or fanaticism. However, there are times in life which are extreme, and perhaps sometimes ask for extreme measures. For many of us, this week was a very extreme week. You know, zealousness or zealotry can be an expression of commitment and love as well. What does God do when he sees the act of Pinchas? He doesn't curse Pinchas. He blesses him with a covenant of peace. Now, the commentary Rashi says, why would he do that? Because it was an expression of gratitude for God. Because Pinchas stood up for God, loved God, and did kindness to God for defending God's honor. Something needed to be done. No one was doing anything. And Pinchas stood up for the integrity of the camp, for the integrity of Jewish values, for the integrity of the faithfulness of the camp. It's this element of zealousness that I want to pick up on. For zealousness is also rooted sometimes in deep commitment, in a feeling of love. It is true that there are people that can go over the deep end, and we are very concerned about that. But I really believe today, at least for most of us, perhaps we should be less concerned about that, and more concerned that we can't or don't do enough, that we're not committed enough, that we're not zealous enough. Many people say that mitzvot are commandments, but that's only partially true. What is a mitzvah? It's a gesture of love, commitment, and kindness, both to God and to others. We give endlessly to those that we love, hopefully. We are zealous about our love for those that are closest to us. Sometimes we think the things that we do are small gestures, but in the essence of a relationship, to the one receiving those gestures, they may not be at all. They may be huge gestures. We have a saying from the book of Exodus. It says, Ushmartem et hamatzot. It says in Exodus, you shall guard the matzah from becoming leaven. The rabbis have a very playful idea. They say, don't read this, Ushmartem et hamatzot, you should guard the matzah, but rather, Ushmartem et hamitzvot, you shall guard mitzvot. Im ba'a liadcha, kach ein machmitzim et hamitzvah, ela im ba'a liadcha aseh ota miyad. Do not allow the moment of doing a mitzvah to become like chametz, to delay forever. But when a mitzvah comes to your hand, immediately do it. We have a saying in the Jewish tradition, Zrizim makdimim lemitzvah. People with an attribute of alacrity Get up early in the morning, very early in the morning to do mitzvot. Think about this, that I wake up in the morning and the first thing I do is, what's a mitzvah that I can do? What can I do to make this world better? The first line in the Shulchan Aruch says, Yakum Adam Kari Lasot Avodat Borei. A person should rise up like a lion to do the work of God. Yes, when it comes to holy actions, to mitzvot, we should be fanatics. We should be very zealous. In my estimate, one of the most difficult emotions to navigate right now is the feeling that we have no control. People don't know how they can help. But paralysis, not knowing what we can do, only increases our sense of helplessness. We don't know how long we live, but we do determine how we live. And this is what mitzvot are about. They are acts of commitment to God. They are acts of commitment to one another. In times like this, when maybe we're experiencing a crisis of faith, don't engage necessarily in questioning why, but rather act with faith, act faithfully, act with commitment, and then the faith will come along. Act, and then the feelings will come. Act zealously. Do more. Give more. The faith will come as a result of your faithful acts, not the other way around. Even if we were not directly affected by this episode this week in Surfside, we each can respond. What do I mean? When we see brokenness in the news, we can look all around us, wherever we are right now, right at this moment, even in our own families, and see brokenness there, and we can address that. There are mitzvot, gestures of commitment and love all around us. That too is a response. We have a tradition that we don't know the value of each mitzvah. We don't know the value of each action that we take. The rabbis tell us that whenever a mitzvah comes to you, you should grab it. So the response, I think, one way to respond to what we're going through, this feeling of uncertainty, is to first act with more kindness, act with more mitzvot, do, continue to do, and use that same zeal of Pinchas, and hopefully will be given strength during these difficult times. Wishing all of you Shabbat Shalom.